audience say about what?
Polling the audience. Did they
Oh,
say you
that's a
should bring
good
him on or not?
I'm gonna have to do that. How do I do that? I
I
think I can.
told you, listen, you're quite the celebrity.
I'll
I
take it.
got at
I'll take
least
it.
three realtors reach out to me today and say, "Hey, Christina, I'm going to watch your show today." And I'm like, "It's not my show." And
Don't say it is.
everybody knows that you're here, and that's pretty cool.
Good. What do you think, Dad?
What, that you're a celebrity?
I'm a celebrity. How about that?
Not in our house. Christian.
That's right. That's right. No, not in my house. That's for sure.
Three.
This is the only place where I get to be a celebrity. That's for sure.
A normal person.
Wherever you can get it.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. So for the uninitiated, Christina, would you
Yes.
like to introduce yourself?
Oh, thank you. Yes, I would love to. So I am Christina Davidow, and I am
I've been
a,
saying that wrong.
how do you say it?
Davidow.
Oh, you know what?
Davidow?
I'm used to it. It's fine.
Okay. All
Yeah.
right.
One time, actually, I was serving because I do a lot of work at my church, and I was lector
Yeah.
back in Nashville. And somebody comes to me, and I was new at the church, and she says, "Do you know Christina Davidow?" And I'm like, "No, I don't know her.
It was you.
Is she another lector?" And she says, "Yes, she's a lector." And I said, "Oh my God, that's me." So I've been Davidow, Davidow. It's okay. I'll answer
The
it.
Davidows are from New Jersey. That's Danny DeVito.
Well,
Well, that's your
my husband
husband.
is from New Jersey, so there's that too.
You're a New Jersey person?
I am not, but I'm actually from Central America, which
Okay.
is why I like everything international, and I'll probably go into that a little bit more in
Well, why don't
detail.
you jump right into that? Because I think some things are just going to make sense as to why you're passionate about it. And
Okay.
let's start there.
Sure.
So how do you, we actually just spent a few minutes catching up as well. So I'm from Naples. I was born here, thanks to the guy on the other screen.
Yeah, I was one of the
You were
participants.
one of the participants, what I hear.
Yeah.
So I didn't have a choice. This place makes sense. You were born in El Salvador.
Well, you know what? I was actually born in the States.
Okay.
My father is Salvadorian German, and my mother is American Dutch. And they met in the United States at college.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so I was born here, but they took me down when I was a baby.
German, Dutch.
Yes, I'm a big mutt. I'm a little bit of everything.
We all are.
Yeah, we all are.
Yeah, and so I grew up in El Salvador. I went to a German school, and we had a lot of international influences, which was really cool because, I learned a lot of different languages. I met a lot of different people, and that was a lot of fun for me. I learned how to do physics in German, and I learned biology in German, and all of these things.
The physics started in German.
What was that?
Physics started in German.
Oh, see, then that was that much better that I was able to do it that way.
Yeah.
So I grew up in El Salvador, and then I moved to the States for college. And I was there, I went to Miami, so I had a lot of international influence in Miami. I learned Italian when I was in college, and just
Wow.
made a lot of really interesting friends when I was there. And so then fast forward after I went to law school and
You're kind of making me look bad. Can you just tone it down a little?
You speak Dutch? Is
No, I don't speak Dutch, but there's still time. I'm only 43.
Dutch?
Good.
All
There's
right.
still time. It sounds like that will happen.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. But so fast forward, then I come to Naples in 2010, which we were just chatting about, and everybody looked the same here. There was very little diversity, and everybody spoke English, and everybody was from the Midwest, at least to me,
Yeah.
in my
Especially
lenses.
coming from the South or coming from Miami or
Yes.
Central America.
Everybody really, it was just very homogenous. And I said, okay, well, this is where I am in life. And then little by little, as I started my law practice, I started somehow attracting people who were international. And I had this one German client, and then I met a German accountant, and then she started. And so over the years, now I have this very vibrant international practice, which
Yeah.
is really cool.
It's really fun.
And I'll go,
We actually have a mutual client, or I guess he's more your client than he is mine, from Sweden.
oh,
Yeah.
yes.
And
that's
so
another one.
there's connection. So the thing that Christina has a huge advantage on with me is that you do speak multiple languages. And because of that, you're going to get pulled into more of these areas. Dad, you and I we do a lot of clients who are foreign. We do a lot of FERPTA. But Christina, it's a probably even bigger piece of your practice just because you can actually relate to more of what they're dealing with. You can speak the language. You can
More comfortable with you.
more comfortable. Yeah, it just makes a lot of sense. So for me, occasionally I'll have people ask me, "Hey, do you speak Spanish?" And I have to say no. Call Christina. If you really want that, I can't really compete with that. I think that's awesome.
Well, and it's funny that you say that too, because even with the languages, so I learned to speak German when I was a kid, and I stopped actively learning it when I started high school because I went to an American high school. And so my vocabulary was kind of stunted at a 12-year-old or 15-year-old age. So I don't have legal vocabulary, and I have to start out by telling my German clients or whoever it is, hey, listen, I can connect with you in German, but I'm not going to talk contracts with you in German.
Yeah.
And so we always have to make sure, and I'm sure you use this a lot too, making sure that you have document translators, making sure that you have, interpreters if you're speaking with them, or translators, and use tools that if you need to get down to the nitty-gritty, that you can. Because as a lawyer, those details are really important.
They're everything, especially when, the only reason they're asking the question because it's unclear to them. So you need to be able to be clear back. Yeah, that's a big challenge. So even being able to connect with someone on a personal level, there's still another level to that.
Yeah.
Do you have an example of last time you had to use Google Translator for that?
Yes, actually, I have. Well, I mean, yesterday I have
there you go.
Japanese clients. I've got, people that you actively need to use those things with every day because I don't speak Japanese. I don't speak, let me think of the other one. Czech was another one that was recent. So yeah, there a lot of times, and that's very helpful.
I've been to the Czech Republic.
Well, you beat me. I've never been to the Czech Republic.
It's beautiful.
You went there.
Ever go to Prague, Dad?
Photos.
Dad, did you go to Prague?
No, but I have a picture. You sent me a picture of a big boot of beer when you went to Prague.
Yeah, that sounds
That's
right.
great. I'm glad we sent you.
Just cultural, indoctrination. That's all it is.
But you have to do that, just like you have to learn the curse words first in the other language.
Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah, where's the bathroom? What are the curse words, and how do I get a beer?
All right, so here's my first question to you. What was it? I guess it was probably a year ago. Florida passes a new law.
Oh, the foreign buyer?
Yeah, the Dirty Seven.
Oh, Lord. Yeah.
All right, so it basically says that people who are nationals from these 7 countries are not permitted to buy real estate in Florida within certain areas. So it's either 5 or 10 miles from a military installation, agricultural land. Essentially, when you look at the map, it was, I don't know, 80 or 90% of the state of Florida. So it was it was easier to say that you probably are prohibited rather than looking for the exclusions. Since then, it looks like it was challenged in court at least once. But what do you do if you had someone from one of these 7 countries who said, hey, I am from one of these countries and I would like to buy in Florida. Can you help me? What would you do? Because I was asked this yesterday, and I don't know if they liked my answer.
This is a really hard question and a hard law to deal with because it invokes so many competing interests. One of the things that realtors are really ingrained with is making sure that you don't discriminate.
Fair housing.
And discrimination. You have a lot of those issues. And so people are trained to immediately not focus on those differences. And now we have this law that's forcing us to focus on exactly what those changes or on those differences are. And so that's the first hurdle that you have to get over. The second hurdle, or I guess a direct answer to your question, what would I do, is I would have them reach out to an attorney. Are you asking me as an attorney or are you asking me as a realtor? Sorry.
That's a great question. Any way you want to answer the question. And I'm sharing the basic understanding of this law here. So it's foreign principals of foreign countries of concern are prohibited from purchasing or acquiring any interest in certain types of Florida real property subject to the following properties or following countries. You have China, Russia, Iran, the list continues. So essentially, this is the law that we're talking about. And, I had a scenario where the person knew that this applied to them and said, can I buy something anyways? And my first inclination was, oh gosh, this is challenging because there has been an 11th Court of Appeals decision that basically said this was unconstitutional, but they haven't removed the law.
It's still there, right?
And the fact pattern was different as well because they were already under contract when this law was passed. So so it's not all the way a match if you were to go under contract today. It's tough. So I told him just to lie. I said, here's the risk. Here's the risk.
And now I know why they didn't like the answer.
Yeah, they didn't like it. I said, I can't do your closing. I said, I know that this probably applies to you, that you're going to have all these issues and that I can't be a willing participant. I said, but if you go to someone else, just don't tell them. I said, that's terrible advice. And I'm not really giving you that advice, but the only way you could avoid this for someone that's trying to do the right thing is you can't buy something right now, or you have to know that for sure you meet one of the exceptions.
Yeah, I go beyond that, Christian. I mean, the example you gave, assume they're from the Department of Justice and they're testing you out. So if you're guiding them to somebody else and telling them not to tell them the whole story, that could be bad.
It's awful. Yeah, I don't. So if you're a realtor in this case, what would you tell a realtor that they should do?
Well, it's if I'm counseling a realtor, that's easy. I would say go see an attorney.
Good. Okay. I love it. So in what we call we call that issue spotting.
Yeah.
So we all learned that in law school. You issue spot. The biggest challenge is just knowing the issue. The issue is that this thing exists. And now you have to go to the next step. I love the IRAC.
I do too.
Yeah, so issue,
like that.
I still do. Issue, rule, analysis, conclusion. I just want you to know the issue. So as a realtor, you know that this is an issue. Now, who knows the rule the best, who can analyze it, who can give the client good legal advice.
Yeah.
So, all right, so you know the issue, call a lawyer.
Yeah.
Now you're the lawyer. They say, Christina, tell me what to do.
That's a little harder. And that's a little bit more detailed. And before I answer that, I want to say, at least in my practice, I have never had, unlike you, that had one yesterday, I have not had one closing that's impacted because the majority of the closing transactions here and even involving foreign nationals are not from the dirty seven. So that's good. But if we were having this conversation on the East Coast with East Coast attorneys.
Yeah, Christina went to school in Miami.
I did. I went to FIU.
FIU, and I did as well. So if we were practicing in Miami, it might be more of a everyday concern.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
I know that there are a lot of people from those areas that are over there. We just don't happen to have them here. But if I did, then I would really dig into, number one, figuring out where the property is, right? Is it within one of the areas that they are prohibited from purchasing in? Number two, and this is an interesting thing.
And that's the easiest answer, because if you can determine that it's not one of the properties that has this restriction, you can say, go, let's do it.
Yep.
I don't even need you to sign this affidavit. We're good.
Yep. Second question is, are you going to use the property as a residence or not? Because there are certain exceptions as to whether you're going to use it as your primary residence or is it an investment property, whatever it is. So that's another one. Number three, if all of those show that you're in the restricted area, you're a restricted person, I would look at, is the purchaser a what was the word in the
Foreign
statute?
national, or foreign principal.
But there's like a residence where it's where
I'm definitely putting her on the spot. So
yeah, and actually it's been a long time. I taught a lot of these classes when it first came out, but since I haven't had to use it so much, there is that you have to be a resident of that country.
So not just born there, not a citizen there,
Yes.
but an active resident there, possibly.
So the question is,
We'll put some disclaimers. We need to double check it.
so it can come about. I have a lot of clients that are kind of like world citizens, where they were born in Germany, but they lived in the UK and then they came to the States and then they went.
Yeah.
And so
I'd say similar to your story.
yeah, kind of. And so it depends on where they're resident of. Because even if they originally came from, let's say, I don't know, Russia, if they are now residents of the UK, then they can sidestep that requirement, even though their passport might be a Russian passport. Domiciled.
Domiciled is the word we were looking for.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you're domiciled in that country of interest, then this could be a real problem.
Yeah.
If you're buying in a restricted area, you're domiciled in that country. Now it's starting to get more restrictive.
Yep. Another thing to look at too is, you can start looking at passports, but passports aren't always determinative because you can have 3 passports from different countries, and that's appropriate under some, not because you're an undercover spy, but because you legitimately have 3 different passports,
multiple citizenship, or maybe you could even, you might be something else. So we rely pretty heavily on this affidavit that we're going to have every buyer sign, which essentially says I'm not a foreign principal as defined, or I am. And so as the title company, as the realtor, you could have them sign this up front if you really wanted. We just wait till closing because this has not been an issue historically. And then someone mentioned in the comments, you could always challenge this in court.
Right. You can.
That's fun.
Something else that's of interest with regard to this law is we amended the contract. We revised the contract at NABOR. You were there.
I was there. Yeah.
You were in all of those meetings. Now
So
your
Christina,
dad is there.
That's right.
I saw him last legal resources meeting.
So Christina's on, how long have you been on the legal resources?
Probably like 5 years now.
5 years. Dad, this is your You did it a while ago, but now you're back.
And now I went to my first one last month.
And because you don't want too many Rosses in one room, I did step out this year. So
one's enough.
Yeah, so we amended the contract to include language on this. I'll see if I can pull it up while you're referring to it.
Yeah, so basically what we did was we realized that this law was going to make a big change for everybody and could potentially put a lot of realtors in hot water that didn't know that it existed. And so we wanted to make sure that it was highlighted in a place on the contract that people would see and would be able to sign. And so we decided to put a box just on top of the signatures that says, attention seller and buyer, conveyances to foreign buyers. And we put that just on top of the signature line so that when the parties are signing the contract, the customers, they're
declaring or representing that they are not subject to this.
Yep. And they might not know that whether they're subject to it or not, because it's very vague. And at that point, I would say if you're from one of these countries and you think you might be a part of this, go talk to an attorney so that they can take on the liability. And as far as realtors are concerned, you, just like you said, issue spotting, know that those issues exist. It's a thing, and that we need to deal with it.
Yeah, exactly.
To inquire, guys, on this? Does the realtor have duty to ask, or is the contract enough?
So the statute has certain liability protection against title companies. Are realtors included in that? They may not be, but it specifically protects title companies and law firms that are doing the closing. But the realtor, that's why NABOR included this language in there, so that we've met your minimum duty to kind of remove any sort of liability. That, hey, the buyer signed this knowing that this is a thing, and that by signing it, they're acknowledging that they're subject to it.
Right.
I don't know if the statute requires the realtor to ask.
I don't know. They're required. I think the key is if they know, they're required to share that. Now they have liability. If they don't know, then it's really hard to pin them on liability. I haven't seen this enforced.
I have not either. And like I said, I haven't actually seen this come across my desk for any.
Yeah, I had
aside from the one yesterday.
Just the one.
Yeah.
I mean, I had a couple. The biggest challenge I've had is between other attorneys, where and I'll show you this form again. And I got some slack initially. Oh, I'm still sharing my screen. Okay, so this is essentially the form that most people have adopted. that we have the buyer sign at closing. And you'll notice it does have a notary on here. Well, on a cash deal,
yes, this
such
is
a
a
pain.
very
And so
practical problem.
no one liked me for this initially. So the statute says, hey, this has to be notarized, but when we have a cash deal, we're not notarizing anything. So I think it's a major inconvenience for a buyer. So a lot of times I get it without it being notarized, knowing that as long as I know there is no form that's been adopted by, I can't remember what organization they made responsible to adopt an affidavit. They never did it. Maybe it was Florida Realtors or
No,
Florida
actually, yes.
Florida Real Estate Commission. So we never actually got anything from FREC. So I'm taking the position, right, as long as I ask them and I get them to sign it, maybe we'll be okay. But obviously this is the form that I prefer to have. And then the attorney on the other side, they're going to want to see a copy of this.
Well, I'll tell you what we do. And this
good.
ties into another topic I wanted to talk about. And this is the most amazing thing that happened to my practice you don't need to write it down.
No.
You know this.
Well, so I take my notes when I'm doing the video so that when I edit it later, I can pinpoint.
Got it. All right.
Yeah, we're gonna make you a star, Christina.
So hey, thanks.
Yeah.
I appreciate you already are one. So
yeah,
it takes one to make one. So what I was gonna say is Ron, a remote online notary, was the best thing to happen to my practice. Really in the last 10 years. So you know that when was it, 2020? During COVID, I think the Florida legislature enacted a statute that allowed remote online notaries for really anything.
Yeah.
And
so historically, a notary was in person.
Right.
You have a stamp. It has to be wet ink. So Florida said, well, we got to find a way to still do closings and sign wills and power of attorneys. So yeah, Ron, you think this was that significant to you?
Ron is amazing to me because in the past, Ron and Virginia Rons, actually.
Okay.
So Virginia Rons are very special. In Florida, you were not allowed in the very beginning. You were not allowed to have international persons be a subject of a Ron.
Yeah, they were pretty limited in who could be remote notarized.
Right. And so what we found through kind of my international channels, because I'm a member of a lot of different international groups and, so anyways, through those channels, I figured out that Virginia had a different statute that allowed foreign nationals to be signatories with a Ron. And so here in the States, when we have a regular domestic transaction with a regular notary, let's say you have a seller that's in, I don't know, New York, like your wife.
Yep.
They're in New York. They can use a New York notary, no problem. And we'll accept it here in Florida. And with Rons, it's no different. If we use a Virginia Ron, we can use them for a real estate transaction in Florida.
Because Florida will recognize a Virginia.
Correct. And then in Virginia, those state statutes say that you can have a foreign national sign a document before a Ron. So we kind of backdoor and we're able to use these Virginia Rons to have foreign nationals sign documents wherever they might be in the world. Because another topic that we should talk about today is
I'll make a note.
There's a lot of fraud with notaries. And so you would get these notarizations from Japan or Italy or wherever they might be in different languages.
Yeah.
And in particular, Japanese, you can't understand it, right? So you don't know what this notary is saying. And it allowed for a lot of potential fraud. And so with Rons, you have this very methodical transaction that you can tell immediately whether something is fraudulent or not. So to me, it gave me great peace of mind. And I use Rons 100% of the time with foreign nationals.
I love that.
Which is very cool.
That's very cool. So they basically have a way, even if the person's, whether they're in the state or not, doesn't even matter, whether in the country or not, doesn't even matter. And it also doesn't matter if they are not even a US citizen.
Correct. Which
was a big issue and continues to be a lot of times. And then this is where you and I struggle with some of the other people in this market. You understand that, but does the other attorney on the other side understand it? And are they going to fight you on it? And does their underwriter understand it? It pays to be right. It pays to be right, or it costs to be right.
Yes.
Dad, I think you've said that before. There's a cost to being right.
Yes, everything has a price.
The Greek philosopher.
Quite a bit. It's not fair. It's not right. Well, it costs money. enforce that.
It costs money to be correct.
Plus
So
time and mental stress and all that.
I have a lot of that, but I think that's
Yeah.
the price that we have to pay as being attorneys, right? We have to
Yeah.
solve everybody else's problems and deal with that stress. And we do it with a smile.
We try. Yeah, we're selling, right, Dad? Dad, you always made a
Smiling.
point. We're all selling something.
Everybody's a salesperson.
Everyone's a salesman. We're all trying to just get this deal done. And before we jump too far, someone asked if FAR has that same disclosure, and it does. It looks the exact same, and it's in the exact same place.
Yeah, we struggled with that a little bit because we looked at their form as we were deciding what to do for the NABOR contract, and they really hit the nail on the head. And we don't always like to do exactly what FAR does for a lot of different reasons. But there was no way to make it better than they had done it. So we just kind of used a very similar form.
Love it. All right, so now we talk about fraud.
Oh, cool.
All right, so
I don't like fraud. I don't like to talk
you
about
just
this.
said cool,
But it's
so we're
important.
done.
Fraud bad.
Pretty sure she just said cool. You know what? So this, I think it almost originated down here. Florida is a sunny place for shady people. The vacant lot fraud. The vacant lot frauds are rampant.
Yes, they are.
But we were kind of on the forefront, at least in my opinion, when I first started hearing about it, I was in Atlanta. There wasn't vacant lot fraud in Atlanta. And I think that's a big part of it is because it's so populated. And there aren't a lot of vacant lots where at least where I lived. But down here, there's still a lot of empty lots, even on Marco Island in downtown Naples. There's a lot of vacant lots. So someone will, they'll look this up on tax records or call your clerk or Lee County. They'll find something that's vacant. They'll find a seller who might be a foreigner, and they'll pretend to be them.
How do they know that they're a foreigner?
Well, that's a good question. Usually they'll look at the tax records.
Yeah, exactly.
They'll look at the forwarding address.
Because these people are smart and they look at government websites with official records that are public knowledge, and they'll go in and they'll figure that out.
So we are at my office today. I'm going to see if I can share my screen. So this is something you can do from anywhere in the world. I'm just going to look up the address and I'm going to see, all right, the owner of the company is Eagle Building. Now, everyone knows you can get a copy of the deed by clicking this link below. But a lot of times you don't even have to go that far if you're just scamming someone. So they'll see Eagle Building LLC, and then they'll see this forwarding address. The forwarding address is very different from the actual address here. So this one is not someone that you would assume is foreign because their forwarding address is here locally. This would be a bad person to scam because the person's here locally. It's also a physical building. You need access. It's going to be really hard to scam. But if we found, properties that were in the Everglades more, maybe in the estates, gets really easy, really quickly. And so they'll impersonate passports or, fake driver's license. Dad, you don't know anyone that might have had a fake driver's license, in college, do you?
Your sister.
Oh God, yeah. Well, I usually throw myself under the bus. It's, if I was doing it for
I don't want to hear about
imagine what someone would do to get thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars.
I knew I was going to like you.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's like, don't kid yourself. If it's that easy, everyone's a target.
Yeah, it's true.
So do you run into that a lot with your foreign? So obviously the Ron thing is a huge help in that regard because we're very concerned about fraud. This person's claiming that they're overseas and they're not able to come. Now we're starting to figure out, okay, what do we have to be worried about?
Yeah. This is a great question and a great topic, particularly for you guys as realtors to hear because it happens every day. And I've had this, unlike the foreign buyer law, I've had this come across my desk a lot. And there are a lot of things that you can do to prevent it. In fact, I wrote an article for NABOR, I don't know, maybe
a year ago, right?
Yeah, I think it was last year. And I talk about this exact topic and what you can do to prevent it, which the first one is make sure, which you always do. I know everybody listening here always asks for ID for their new customer.
Yeah, but as you know, everyone has a fake ID.
Right.
So that's just step
only
one.
That's only one. So you look at their ID, you talk to them. And one of the problems is when you get a new customer from the ether, right? You're not expecting this person. They just call. You're excited because it's a new customer. It's a new, it's a new lead. It's a new adventure. And so you want to accept them and you need to make sure that you do your due diligence as you move forward through the process. So number one is the driver's license or identification.
Good.
What happens with foreign buyers a lot, or foreign sellers, is that they're in a different country and they're talking to you by phone or Zoom or whatever it is. And so you can't see those physical documents. And if they email something to you, maybe they look different. Maybe they're in kanji. Maybe they're in, some, I don't know, Russian language with different, you don't know what it is.
I can't even tell what's a fake Florida license. So I'm never going to be able to tell what is a fake UK license or a, who knows, a French passport. I'm not going to tell. And my underwriter, they weren't very much help. They just said, well, you can look it up online and you can check the two. I'm like, you got to go more. You got to do more.
So this is where a RON comes in handy with this.
Remote online notary.
Yep. A RON comes in handy because they do know, and they run the database searches based on what is there. So if you have a buyer, they're going to have to buy using that foreign notary affidavit. Get that done in the beginning with the RON.
Oh, I like that.
If they're a seller, you have to wait a little bit longer, but then they're going to have a FIRPTA issue. And so we'll talk about that in a minute. But the reason I bring this up now is they have to go to a certified acceptance agent, a CAA. And that person is in charge, or has been delegated the authority by the IRS to review and confirm documentation and ID. And in order to be able to move forward with the FIRPTA process, you have to get an ITIN, an individual
taxpayer identification number.
That has
Although
to
I
be
still say ITIN number, so
a little redundant, but we'll forgive you. That's okay. And they need to confirm it at the very beginning. Now, I've had clients that said, I don't want to deal with FIRPTA. I'll just let go of that 15% because
I don't need the money
not deal
back.
with it. First red flag.
Anyone that doesn't care about the 15%.
Yeah, because that means that they don't want to give over their documents. They'd rather, lose $500,000, $475,000, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
So that they can avoid having to give the documentation. So a CAA.
Is she spotting here? Yep.
Yeah, a CAA is great because that's the way that I confirm it. And if I'm ever uncomfortable with a certain client of mine or customer of yours, I always go to a CAA and have them verify that identity. That's what they do for a living. They do it better than I do. Let's delegate that to the expert.
Yep, I agree with you. I'll go even further with it. So now you've got your ID that you verified.
Mm-hmm.
You've got the CAA or CPA, someone that is being hired to do it. And then I like asking for a copy of their closing documents from when they bought it. And what it does is it, and Dad, you and I have had this a couple of times where we're starting to get uncomfortable, but we don't want to upset the person.
Right.
And the agent, we work for the agents. They're our audience. We don't want to upset them. And so we'll start asking questions there, and we'll say, we got a response once, Dad. What did you ask him for a copy of their closing statements? And he said like burned in a fire.
Burned in a fire. He couldn't send me his passport. It was actually up in Georgia, and I used your old firm and said, well, oh, great. Where in Georgia? And
yeah, we sent him to the office and said, hey, just go here, ask for Peter. He'll help you out. And
it was a vacant lot of Marco.
No, it was such a mess. We all knew it was a fraud. The problem.
So it was a fraud?
It was totally a fraud.
The price was too good. I mean, when the price is too good, it's.
Yeah, and this is not just a risk to the realtor. It's not just a risk to the seller. It's a risk to the buyer as well. In that particular case, the buyer had put $5,000 down or $10,000, and now the seller, we're claiming the seller's a fraud. We won't do the closing. Where's the deposit? Like now the seller's saying, no, I'm real. And they're fighting for this deposit and the buyer's now at risk. Their whole deposit could be just held up in litigation, or it could just be held up until you have something. I would say in that scenario, there was one big mistake, is that the buyer didn't want to believe us.
Okay.
And they switched the closing to a different closing firm.
Even though you were trying to protect the buyer?
Yes. They didn't, and so they moved it. And I said, okay, well, I've done my due diligence. I've warned them. And then I found out maybe 3 weeks later that it was a complete sham. So pretty sad. There's other technology. So, the remote online notary, they do all this, their technology basically verifies where the person's located. It verifies their IP address. It does all of these things. Well, there are other companies that will do that even if you're not notarizing. So we use a company called Certified that will verify someone's legitimacy. And oftentimes we'll ask them if they can come in person. We'll check these records. We'll ask for the title insurance policy or a settlement statement. It starts to unravel quickly. So you can tell.
And more often than not, like if you start pushing those buttons, even the initial ones, they just disappear.
They start to disappear.
And the closing falls apart, and they're gone, and then the problem solves itself. But you have to make sure, and I think this is the most important part, follow your intuition. Like if you get a bad feeling about a certain closing, it's probably for a reason. You guys are professionals. You know what feels right and what doesn't. If you feel that uncertainty, bring that up to somebody so that we can vet that out a little bit better. And you guys sound like you do a great job with that already. That's awesome.
Yeah, and we also like sending a letter. So
the FedEx trick?
The FedEx trick.
Yes.
It works so perfectly. So we'll look at the tax records, we'll see the forwarding address, and we'll send them a letter. And I had this one guy, I actually Googled him, and I saw that he owned a dairy farm in Minnesota. And I just called and I said, "Is Gary there?" And Gary, "Yeah, it's me." I said, "Are you selling your property down in Florida?" He goes, "No way. Why would I do that?" So you got to be on your P's and Q's in that sense.
Very disconcerting.
All right. So the other thing that we have in these sales contracts is FIRPTA.
Oh, yes.
All right. So again, we're going to issue spot here. So for the realtors out there, it's it's a withholding tax on foreign sellers. And it's a requirement at closing. It's in the sales contract. It's something that we have to address with every foreign seller. So you don't know what goes on next. You don't have to know all the steps, but you have to know it exists. Right? I think the issue spot, what is FIRPTA? Yeah. Christina, fill in the gaps here. What is FIRPTA?
So FIRPTA is, it's basically a withholding, and it depends on the amount of the withholding depends on the amount of the sale price.
It's like if you get a paycheck, I'm going to get, a certain amount that's sent to the IRS right now. And then when I file my tax return later, I'll get some of it back, hopefully. But FIRPTA, because they're foreigners, they're not going to have that, right?
Right.
So they hold it at closing. How much do they hold?
So if the property is between, it also depends. Okay.
But here it is.
So it's either
I put it up
15%
here on the
or 10% or 0%.
Yeah, there's a scale. I would say the safest thing to remember is 15%.
Yep.
And hopefully we can find some work down from there depending on the circumstances.
So the closing agent will withhold 15% of the purchase price or the sales proceeds, and they'll remit that to the IRS. Now, the seller has an option. They can either go ahead and do that and remit the full amount that's due.
Yeah, we send a check to the IRS within 21 days.
20 days of
20
closing.
days, not 21.
Be careful with 21.
Don't want to do that.
You don't want to send it 21. 20 days after closing. And although your paralegals know that probably like the
Much
back
better
of their
than,
hand.
well, it's the next day we want it out of here.
So within 20 days, they send a check, and then the IRS will hold that until the next time that customer or that foreign national files their tax return, at which point they'll get back anything above and beyond any taxes that they owe.
And this is how people are doing it, the majority right now.
Yes.
So we send in a check at closing right to the IRS, gets held there, and then so if we're closing, this is January of 2025.
Oh, that's not a good time for FIRPTA.
Yeah, because you're gonna have to wait until January of 2026 to file your 25 return. But that's what you'll do. You'll hire a U.S. CPA to file a tax return on your behalf to claim whatever money is owed back to you.
So the option is, if you don't want to wait until the next January.
Yeah, so if you didn't want to wait 12 months.
There is an option that really isn't that viable anymore. But
it's not attractive.
Yeah. It's called the withholding certificate application. And basically, the CPA that you hire to do the work for you, the FIRPTA work, they will do a mini tax return to figure out the maximum exposure that they have. And they will only send that piece to the IRS, and they'll give the remainder to the seller right then and there at closing. Or within a certain amount of receiving the application approval. And so that's much quicker in theory.
In theory,
In
it's supposed to be
theory.
quick because you escrow the money
Yeah.
until you hear from the IRS, and that's the problem.
Mhm.
COVID was the problem with
Yes,
this, right?
yes.
Yeah.
And so I have a lot of CPA friends. Hello out there if you're there. And this was a really important part of their practice because people like to get their money faster.
Yeah.
And it used to be that it would take, 3 to 4 months to get that money back. So if you closed in January, you could have your money back by April, May, maybe June. So
By
then,
statutes, 90 days, right? It's supposed to be pretty
yeah,
quick.
that doesn't. I
They have to
actually asked.
respond within 90 days. They
Yeah, they
don't-
seem to be ignoring that statute lately.
Yeah, very much so.
Well,
Ever since
they're out of the office.
Yeah.
Your Aunt Julie works there.
Actually, you know what? I interned when I was in Atlanta because I went to law
Yeah.
school in Atlanta. I interned at the IRS and I got to know a lot of those people, and they like to take a lot of breaks. And there were more people outside the building than there were inside the building doing work.
So
But-
I interned in
How it works there.
DC. Dad, you remember me interning at DC and you got audited 4 years in a row?
Oh no.
Yeah, so I interned at the general counsel's office in DC, which was
I did the
super
general
cool.
counsel's office in Atlanta.
Yeah, I tried to get a job there, and when I didn't, I had to fall back to this job. Dad, sorry.
I heard you play golf a lot when you were in
I
Germany.
tried to. Yeah, that's right. No, I thought it was an incredible job. The
Breakfast.
key that I learned with the IRS was they really are trying to get it right, but there's no real motivation to get it done quick.
No, there were a lot of cigarette breaks when I was out there.
Oh, there you go.
There was a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah, I should have picked up smoking.
So that's how you got to make friends back then.
That's right.
Anyways, so now back to business. Now it's taking, I think I asked one of my CPAs the other day, and she said it was like 18 to 24 months to get back a withholding application certificate. And
That's 2 years, everybody.
And
That's
that's not-
ridiculous.
yeah, that's not the way it's supposed to work. So that's not a viable option at this time. If at some point in the future the IRS pulls everything back together, that was a great option in the past, and hopefully it is again, because it made foreigners feel like it was not so bad to sell their property.
They
'Cause
weren't
you
being
don't have-
penalized.
Yeah, you don't want to have a lot of money tied up for a significant amount of time. So hopefully that happens.
No, so it just to regroup on that, because the seller is foreign, we are never going to see them again, or at least that's the concern, is that if they sell, what's the motivation for them to pay the tax? So we collect it at closing. Now, why in the world do we make it the buyer's problem?
Oh, yeah, that's a
Yeah,
good
because
point.
we obviously, we're trying to do a closing. We need the buyer to help coordinate this. And if it's not done, the IRS can put a lien on the house. So how do we kind of rationalize that?
Yeah. So the rationale goes back to what you were just saying. The foreign national leaves theoretically, and they're not here anymore. But the buyer who purchases the house in the United States, they're still here. And that asset is still there to be liened. So the legislature, or I guess the IRS through regulations, they came up with the plan that instead of leaving it up to a whim, they were going to take what was physically here in the United States and make that buyer responsible for FIRPTA.
So they really didn't have any other options.
No, that was it. And so the interesting thing that happened over the last few years was the contract, because, and actually it was FARBAR and NABOR, there was always a conflict between, okay, it's the buyer's duty to withhold, but it's the seller's fault that withholding is required.
Completely.
Who needs to pay for that? And so now both contracts provide that the seller is responsible for paying for any FIRPTA work, but it's the buyer's obligation. So that caused a lot of fights back in the day, because especially for me, because a lot of my clients were foreign nationals, and the buyers didn't want to pay for it. And I just finally had to tell them, listen, sellers, you have to pay for it because it's yours. And now the contracts specify that that's the case. So that's helpful.
Yeah, I think so.
I think the FARBAR differs a little bit more too. It allows the closing agent to decide whether or not to escrow the money if there's an application for a withholding certificate, but no response yet. They can actually just say, no, we're not going to hold the money, because sometimes the IRS takes forever to deal with it, and you have a lot of angry people calling you.
Yeah, and you know what? Sometimes this has happened to me in the past, which was really a bummer. We submitted everything to the IRS timely, and we never received their answer for the withholding certificate. It just didn't arrive in the mail. And so we couldn't submit what we needed to submit, and they actually held my client responsible, and I had to step up to the plate And I just said, okay, fine, I'll pay for it, because it didn't arrive in my office, and that was a big bummer. So even we try as much as we can in these contracts to make it fair, to make it palatable, and to make it workable. But sometimes there are things that are outside our control, and we just have to deal with them as best as we can in the course of business.
And there's an evolution to the issue. It started out as one thing, just trying to comply with the statute. And then we started realizing this isn't working. Buyer doesn't want to pay. And you're just, as time evolves, we realize these are issues. So in these legal forms meetings, you'll have one of the attorneys raise their hand, or a realtor raise their hand saying, hey, I just had this problem. And everyone else is like, oh, I've never seen that. Well, a year later, everyone's had that problem.
That's true.
So you really have to be a good listener and start being proactive about some of the stuff. So this is the FERPTA or FERPTA section in the FAR contract. Dad, you're right. It does specify, it's a little bit more on here. It does give the closing agent a little bit more discretion. Personally, I don't like holding money in escrow. I'd rather just send it to the IRS. But I had that backfire on me also. We had two deals. One of them, the other attorney might be at that side of the parking lot somewhere. The other attorney got a letter because they never submitted the check on time. They waited 21 or more days.
They were one of the 21
They were
people.
one of the 21 days people. And it was a $13,000 penalty for doing that.
Yikes.
Yeah, so that was tough. We tried to help out any way we could, but it was not our seller's fault.
And you represented the seller.
We represented the seller. The money was taken at closing, and they had to just submit it. And they tried to make it our problem, but it really wasn't. We just tried to help them see if they could get their fee down or their penalty. And we had another deal where, and now I'm going to draw a blank. Oh, everything was submitted. We were the closing agent, but the IRS lost it.
Oh,
which happens.
that does happen.
It happens. It took us 9 months to figure out and get the IRS to say, oh, that was our fault.
They said that? They agreed it was their fault?
They agreed in writing that it was their fault. But in the meantime, they put a lien on the buyer's house.
Oh, geez.
So the buyer is freaking out because he's trying to point fingers at us. And I'm saying, hey, let me check. But when we really dug into it, we got an agent out of Utah who, he's like, yep, I can see you have the certified mail receipt. We have the check. We received it. We just never applied it to the account. But it took 9 months to figure all that out.
Well, you found the one unicorn that was willing to do that for you.
I got lucky. Yeah.
You did?
The IRS can be tough. It's, just getting someone on the phone is really challenging. I think that's probably as much time as I have for you today, unfortunately.
Listen, I told you in the beginning, I can talk about this all day long.
Yeah, I know.
And now you know that's true.
Yeah, no kidding. So if anyone wants to reach Christina, how should they reach you?
They can go to my website, www.willisdavidow.com. But I don't want to take anybody from here,
Well, I think
go to him first. And if you don't like him, then come to me. What do you think?
Here we go. Here's her website. There she is. I think that she's great. I refer stuff to you when I can't handle what I have.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
And your business does expand into areas that I'm not doing. So do you do wills and estates as well?
Oh, yeah.
And then you have several people that work for you. Who are the other attorneys in your office?
So first of all, my husband and law partner, Joe, he does all of our litigation.
So what kind of litigation does he like?
Mainly construction litigation.
Oh, that's scary.
But he'll take any of it on.
Okay.
He likes the courtroom. And he's got his whole litigation side. And I run our transactional side where I do real estate and estate planning and probate law.
Good. I love it. Perfect. So don't hesitate to call Christina if you need her. And thank you for watching and thank you for joining.
Thank you, everybody, for your time. It was so great. And if I can answer any questions for you, let me know.
And you can find her at NABOR as well. So you're always teaching classes down there.
Yes, I do teach a lot.
Good. All right. Well, thank you.
You're welcome.